At what do we talk about when we talk about love? Anybody really real offended by this story? No? Oh, okay. So Carver's known for his short stories. He published 5 collections of short stories and 5 collections of poetry by the time he was 50. Then he died of lung cancer. He's a heavy smoker. Um, but no novels. He was kind of like de Maupassant, like Anton Chekhov. His gift was only for stories. But also, he may not have been able to concentrate on a novel, the length of a novel, because he was, for a good part of his life, a severe alcoholic. And that comes through, I think, in this story. It examines that state. He was a huge influence on writers in the 1980s into the 90s. Uh, there would be workshops, or I would conduct workshops. Many young writers there tried to write in his style, a kind of pared down Hemingwayish sort of style. And I would tell these young writers that they couldn't do that unless they burned out half their brain cells with alcohol. That was the only way you could write like that. Well, you can't just copy another writer. So he's trying to wake them up. Uh, so Carver went to Chico College for a while. This is in California. And there he met John Gardner, who happened to be doing a short stint there. John Gardner became one of the better known writers of the 80s and 90s, kind of faded now. Died suddenly in a motorcycle accident. He was a careful, committed writer. John Gardner also wrote a book called On Moral Fiction, which made a big splash in the 80s. So later, Carver got a BA from a small college in California, I believe. Anyway, he got enough college that he'd like to add details that I think he seemed to hope maybe academics would call symbols. And wherever he descended into that realm, he ruined what he was writing, his essential gift. As you'll see, I'll point out in this particular story. Instead of, say, symbols, you'll find in this story several wise metaphors that no critic or essayist, academic, as far as I know, has ever mentioned. There's 4 main ones. Knight in a suit of armor. Uh, the elderly couple who are in full-length casts. Uh, a description of the enclosing shine of alcohol is described as kind of a cocoon enclosing these people. And then, 4th one, the suit of a beekeeper. In all of those metaphors, you get covering, trying to enclose the self inside something else. So what's the point? Well, the 2 couples use alcohol as a suit of armor or a beekeeper suit, an enveloping cocoon, to keep them from facing the underlying problem they all exhibit, which is their inability to live with committed affection for another person, much less love. They're all kind of hateful beings and have never very nice things to say about one another. So that's why what all the talk is about, love, because none of them have it. All 4 are in their second marriages. And the narrator, me, later called Nicky, and his younger wife, Laura, these are the couples, and of course the McGinnis couple, Mel and Teresa, or Terry as she comes to be called. Did it occur to anybody that McGinnis is an Irish name and Teresa was a name that Catholic girls got in the 50s? Teresa, like Mary and Teresa. and now it's the 80s, so these people are about 30 years old. So that would have been a name that Teresa was given in the 50s, and Mel avoids it by calling her Terry. And we also learned that Mel spent 5 years in a seminary before going to medical school to get his degree. He's a cardiologist, means a heart surgeon, basically. And from that early training in a seminary, 5 years, he's come to believe that love is spiritual. Well, he has trouble demonstrating that. I had trouble finding a spiritual statement of him here in this, and he's pretty mean to Terry. This is kind of common in a relationship. And we're going to learn about Terry, how she's been abused by her husband, but a woman who's been abused, if they get rid of that husband, they tend to fall into a relationship with another abuser. And here, Mel is definitely a mental abuser, and he's going to, toward the end of the story, as he gets drunker and drunker, he's going to be staring at her with his mean looks, like, I wouldn't want to be around that evening. Okay, so that's what's going on here. In her first marriage, she says, he beat me up one night. One night, she says. He dragged me around the living room by my ankles and kept saying, I love you, you B word. Now, if this is all about love, that's not love, and that's pretty much what Mel says. This is not love. This is something else. However, he gets kind of involved in the same sort of thing as I've suggested. So whatever faith or former faith all might have had or been involved in, or ascribed to, or perhaps cast from them, as McGinnis seems to have done. Right now, the two couples are in a kind of satanic mess that former believers fall into in their hell-bent handbasket run toward hell. There's no redeeming nature in any of this short story. And whether Carver meant it this way or not, I believe he's issuing a warning to all of us who feel, well, you can love somebody for a while and then switch to, don't have to have that kind of allegiance that, say, Scripture prescribes. You can kind of just drift through different relationships and don't get too worried about drinking because everybody does it. Did you know that if you have one blackout, you're an alcoholic? That's pretty much because it means you can be easily poisoned by it, and that's the first step toward alcoholism. So if people say, "Yeah, I've had 6 of them," well, watch it, because that used to be my response, and I became a kind of an alcoholic for a while. Not that I had to have it all the time, but I was a binge drinker. No more. Thank God. I mean, these habits like drinking and smoking, God's got to remove them. You can't just, okay, I'm going to quit. That's tough. It's tough to do. You have to be healed of them, I feel. Anyway, so they think their lives, I think you probably could say this, their lives can't get worse, but I think they do, even in sort of the 10 or 12 pages of whatever this would come out as typed. In this story, we have a suicide. We have the death of a teenager. We have an elderly couple in full-length casts, and a doctor who knows his first wife is allergic to bees, so he wants to come to the door as a beekeeper and release a swarm of bees on her. She's the kind of person who go into anaphylactic shock if they're stung by a bee, and then if they get stung by too many, I had an uncle who got stung by a bee and he just dropped. He was on a scaffold, he just dropped off it. But then he found he couldn't get stung anymore, so he watched out for those bees. So he's thought through doing this, and he thinks, oh, I hope the children aren't home then, because he has 2 children with his previous wife. This is his first wife he's talking about. So Mel says he wouldn't call Ed's love. Ed is Carrie's first husband. Ed's love for Terry real love. And that's the abusive husband who ends up taking rat poison to kill himself when Mel has taken his wife away. And that doesn't work. It just makes his teeth kind of fall out. So instead, he shoots himself in the mouth with a .22 pistol. Terrible stuff in this story. Just imagine in less than 12 pages, all this stuff happens. And that doesn't quite kill him. But it causes his head to swell to twice its normal size. And it's so awful that Mel, who's a doctor, doesn't want Terry, his wife, to see it. And remember, that's her first husband, but yet he allows her somehow. Anyway, she does sit with Ed till he dies of the gunshot wound. This happened to a neighbor. He got shot with a .22. His wife, he was up in a haymow there shooting at birds or probably pigeons. His wife set down the .22 in it, and he was just above it and went up through his head. And his head did swell up like that, but he lived. But all he could say the rest of his life was no. 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 Like that. That's all he ever said. So these things do happen. And some people suggested maybe she hadn't just set the rifle down. They were a married couple. So Ed threatened Mel before he shot himself that he was going to shoot him, and Mel got so afraid to even walk to his car at night that he got a firearm himself. And then he even wrote a will and wrote a letter to his brother, who was a Green Beret, telling him who to look for if he was killed. So how could he handle all this, go through all this, if the person whose wife he's living with now, how could he resolve the situation that was say going on between him and this Ed? What could he have done?
Maybe he moved away.
How about trying to talk to him? I thought if he'd shoot him in public, maybe if he'd. The only way to resolve anything with somebody like that is to try to talk to him. And usually, if you have somebody else with you, it's best to talk to him alone first. But if you're afraid they might shoot you, I doubt if they would. Have somebody else with you and try and just say, I'm really sorry about this, but she seems to want to live with me, and can we resolve this somehow in a fruitful and kind way without you trying to kill me? And maybe it'd work, and maybe it wouldn't. The idea would be to get him to, I guess, forgive Mel. If you could do that. All right, and look at this on, where is this? Page 171. Yeah, toward the bottom of page 171, Mel was 45 years old. He was tall and rangy with curly, soft hair. His face and arms were brown from the tennis he played. When he was sober, his gestures, all his movements were precise, very careful. Now, we've been about 2 pages or so into this story, and why did he save this description for now? It's like somebody who is writing a story about a couple, and you get 4 or 5 pages into it, and the writer says, "Oh, yeah, by the way, she was a redhead." You've already pictured her as a blonde or brunette or something. This is the kind of construction of fiction that is not so good. Because usually when you introduce a character, you'd say basic things like that, just so the reader can get a little grasp of who the person is. So I would say this is one example of a bad construction of this in this particular story. Uh, and then if we look on, how does the what can we call it? How does the natural world affect the situation of four people who end up emptying 2/5 of gin in an afternoon? That's a lot of booze. Last time I had a glass of gin was a long time ago. I was swacked for all night into the next morning. Gin kind of hangs around. Not such great stuff, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, 2/5 of gin in an afternoon, four people. That means each of them drank probably a half a fifth of gin. A fifth is a fifth of a gallon. It's a little larger, larger than smaller than a quart. Yeah, a little bit smaller than a quart. Yes.
What's the percentage of alcohol in gin?
And gin, I think, is probably about 80. Yeah. I think you can get Gordon's would probably be about 80, 85. Probably cheaper gins, 60, 70. Well, he says it is. He says it is. But still, it's not like beer, it's 6. Wine, 12, 14. Yeah. Okay, how does the natural world affect it? What is this? What was I looking for here? Oh, yeah. This description. The leaves of the aspen, this is the natural world. The leaves of the aspen that leaned past the window ticked against the glass. The afternoon sun was like a presence in the room, the spacious light of ease and generosity. We could have been anywhere, somewhere enchanted. We raised our glasses again and grinned at each other like children who had agreed on something forbidden. Oh man, that's pretty bad. We grin at one another like children who agreed on something forbidden. Uh, it's like the situation in Eden here, but with a grin of delight instead of any guilt or overriding remorse, regret. That sense of sin would eventually enchain all of humankind. And once you get chained in with evil or get tied into evil, it only takes you downhill. It never moves upward. So, what is real love? According to Mel, I mean, he says it's spiritual, but then what story does he tell to illustrate what real love is? The elderly couple who are in the car crash, right? I think they're driving a motorhome, aren't they? And the teenager hits him at a pretty good speed, and they're both hospitalized. He's killed immediately, and they're wearing seat belts, so they aren't. So there's a little advertisement for seat belts in here. Too bad they aren't seat belts for alcohol, right? Something that makes you well, if you have a car along for a while, they're putting those things in. You had to blow into something before your car would start. Do you ever hear that? Yeah. I think it's probably people who were already had one, a DUI against them, something like that. Yeah. So it's the elderly couple he sees real love in them because they're both in these full-length casts, but the husband is depressed all the time, and he thinks he's depressed because of his injuries. What is he depressed about? He can't see his wife. The eye holes in his cast don't allow him to see his wife. That's why he's depressed. So Mel feels this is real love. So then they talk about food. Maybe have a meal at a new restaurant. None of them had tried it, but maybe they'll go there and have a meal. And Mel says if he had to do it over, he'd be a chef. He's also said he'd like to be a knight. He's going to say that soon. But here he says he'd like to be a chef. If you ever think, if I had a chance to do it over, what I would do, you're just wasting your time. It's already over. So you got to face up what you are at the moment and move on from there. So that's always kind of a way to cop out. So first a chef and then a knight in shining armor. What were knights supposed to do? Go swashbuckling through, have duels, draw their swords like people draw their pistols in westerns. What were knights supposed to do?
Impress women.
That's right, they're supposed to take care of their lady love. Often it was a woman of higher society, and they would carry her kerchief or something like that with them, and to signify they were always her protector. That's why they wore the armor, to protect her against any sort of incursion into her life, and probably some of them still thought there were dragons and stuff like that around. Anyway, that's what knights were obliged to do, to take care of their the lady they were dedicated to. And why is it that Nicky, who's the narrator, why we'll learn his name about here, why is he suddenly so well read on knights? I don't know, he's just been kind of out of it for most of this story. Doesn't have much to say at all except agreeing with Mel mostly. How can he go on about how they get suffocated in their armor sometimes, or it got so hot they had a heart attack in there? I mean, where can you find that information anyway? Who'd know it was a heart attack? Or they fell off their horse and they couldn't get up and they got trampled by their own horse? Plus an S. Does that sound like what a horse would do? Pardon? Yeah, if it got scared. The thing is, if somebody falls off a horse, they generally get the heck out of there. And especially if it's a big clunking crash. They don't like that stuff around there. So that just sounds like somebody who doesn't know beans about horses. And then there's the disagreement about vessel and vassal. That may be true, but there's a sense of it being a little bit contrived. I feel the knight in armor is a little contrived. Stuff can happen to him. And then this seems contrived, the way they go between vessel and vassal. The way it switches back and forth between Terry and Mel when she corrects him. And then it's as if he doesn't like that. So then he picks up the correct way. So after the story of the elderly couple is cleared up, the narrator says about the moment now, he said, maybe we're a little drunk by then. They're juiced out of their minds. and after Mel's thought about calling his children, that comes toward the end, he's going to call his children. which is sort of the last-ditch sentimental, sloppy emotion of a drunk. Well, let's call the kids. I mean, that's pretty common. Then he thinks about appearing as a beekeeper, and he makes the sound of buzzing bees with his finger near Terry's throat. So he's getting more and more invasive, you might say, into her space. So then we get this. He says, maybe I won't call the kids after all. Maybe it wasn't such a hot idea. Maybe we'll just go out. How does that sound? Sounds fine to me, I said. Now, suddenly we get the narrator appearing more profoundly. Eat or not eat or keep drinking, I could head right on out into the sunset. What does that mean, honey? Laura said. That's his second wife, her second husband, to Nikki. It just means what I said. It means I could just keep going. That's all it means. I could eat something myself, Laura said. I don't think I've been so hungry in my life. Is there something to nibble on? I'll put out some cheese and crackers, Terry said. But Terry just sat there. She did not get up to get anything. Mel turned his glass over. He spilled it out on the table. Gin's gone, Mel said. Terry said, now what? I could hear my heart beating. I could hear everyone's heart. I could hear the human noise we sat there making, not one of us moving, not even when the room went dark. This is the kind of stuff that you don't need. I mean, it's like adding a moral or something. You just don't need that sort of thing. It'd probably be better to end it saying, the gin's gone, Mel said. Terry said, now what? And it'll leave it up to you to think whether they're going to go out and eat, whether they're going to get worse, in a worse shape, or whether they're going to go out and get another fifth of gin. So I would call it an overplayed ending, just like tossing something toward the academics. And because in the natural world, it just doesn't get dark in that quickly. Even in December, it gets dark pretty quickly. And this is in summer. And remember, there's brilliant sunlight in at least two descriptions. Okay, any questions? Anybody having any trouble with the papers? These guys got it done, got them done. And other people are going to have them done. Well, I pray for you all. I pray you all do well in your papers.
Thank you.